Well, this last week, because of these kinds of readings, in Bible study, we focused our studies on the word Armageddon. In some ways, it seems like in this reading today, that's what Jesus is talking about when he and his disciples are standing outside Jerusalem's beautiful temple. But when Jesus starts predicting that not one stone will lie upon another when it will be destroyed, and about all the catastrophes that will take place before the end is not actually what he's teaching us. What Jesus is preparing us is for the inevitability of change. The inevitability of change. And that's something that most of us have a little bit of problem with, change. Now, change is something that most of us aren't thrilled about. What I've found in my time of working with soldiers over the decades and their families, that there's nobody who understands what change can do better than a veteran. Think about it. Why do people go to war? Why do people go to war? They go to war to throw the other side into chaos, to destroy what was good and stable and dependable for the advantage of power over the people. War is fought to create fear, and for one side or another, to demonize the other side. We've all been through that with the elections, have we not? But there is an old African proverb that one of my colleagues quotes when he speaks of war. When elephants fight, the grass suffers. When elephants fight, the grass suffers. You know, too often when fighting occurs, it's the common people of the land that suffer the most. My colleague says that history records that those who make the difficult decisions to wage wars, you know, the military brass, the legislators, the leaders, often have the least to lose. For them, the essential well-being and access to basic necessities continue. But sadly, the same has not occurred for those who serve as instruments of war. Compared to those who did not serve, by the way, veterans are disproportionately, according to the statistics, disproportionately homeless, disproportionately underemployed or unemployed, and disproportionately suffer with mental illness. Do you realize that every single day in this country, at least 25 veterans, men, commit suicide? And the number actually is higher for female veterans. When the elephants fight, the grass suffers. We know, listening to Jesus talk about the suffering that his disciples will endure in his name, that in this life we will sacrifice, we will voluntarily suffer for Jesus. Those who either volunteer for service, or as we remember from the Vietnam War when I was coming of age, get drafted into the military, sacrificing themselves for something they have been told is so much greater than themselves. But there are few people, I think, who realize that those people, when they go to war, will never be the same people again. Jesus was warning us to be prepared to embrace change. For one reason or another, personally, my life has been involved with men and women in the military. Coming of age during Vietnam War, as I said, I came to know that some men going off to war were often nothing more than idealistic teens, going into combat for God and country. A friend of mine in college one weekend asked me to go on a date with Bob. Bob was a veteran. Bob would be a veteran, but he was a Marine, brand new Marine, who was about to be shipped to Vietnam with his platoon in 3 weeks. Bob really was kind of like a goofy, enthusiastic kid in a big body, is what it came down to. He had already, unfortunately, acquired a racial prejudice towards Asians and used the predominant slurs of the day for the people when he talked about them. I didn't know he was like this until after I said I would go on the date with Bob. On our first and only date, Bob had a really wonderful, good friend, Marine friend, Jeremy, that he had grown up with in New Rochelle. The difference was that Jeremy was back in town for a short time and would be returning to Southeast Asia. He had already done 2 tours in Asia and 2 deployments. And he was really concerned about Bob's attitude before this young man went off to conflict. That night, Bob and I went to Jeremy's house, where he wanted to show Bob some slides from the actual war, so he would know what he was getting into. Bob seemed so excited to see the pictures from the Vietnam jungle. And then the slides started. It showed the men moving into a Viet Cong village with a big tank behind them with a gun on it. There were pictures of children and women coming out from their houses. The men were nowhere to be seen because they were the ones fighting the Americans guerrilla style. The soldiers started to befriend the kids, and they offered them candy. And then they offered them more candy if the kids would tell them where they could find their fathers. A few more slides, and there was one of the tank a day later, with its gun pointed high, and the dead father of one of the children hanging by one ankle from the gun, sending the message of what the Americans were going to bring to those who resisted. Jeremy looked at Bob. He said, "This is what war is, Bob." But to Bob, it still seemed like some kind of macabre game. Fast forward some 8 months, and I was dating Gary at that time. And I went to our favorite place on Main Street in New Rochelle, a hamburger joint named Chumley's. I arrived a little bit early to see Gary. So when I entered, all the way in the back, I looked, and at a really dark table alone, I spotted a familiar shape drinking. It was Bob, and yet it was not Bob. I went over to him, and I discovered a hollow core of a man no longer boastful and full of energy. He had come home with a permanent hole in his leg, but a much bigger hole in his spirit. The combat experience of deciding who lives and who dies, and watching his companion, his brothers, and the band of brothers who was standing next to him, vaporized by a bomb. It was too much. Moral injury, and that's the term that we use, moral injury is a complex and even more broad-reaching consequence of war. It's more prevalent than PTSD or traumatic brain injury. Veterans who experience moral injury can be overwhelmed by negative feelings of guilt, shame, remorse from past acts that violated their code of morals. Oftentimes, they feel disinterest in previously enjoyable activities or genuinely find it hard ever to be happy. A veteran may feel like they can't trust anyone because they've seen how dangerous the world is or feel emotionally numb. Awake or asleep, a trigger can cause painful memories to resurface and make the sufferer feel as if they're experiencing the event all over again. Veterans were often involved situations that remind them of the event, and many of the veterans avoid crowded places like malls or even coming into church. And we had this happen here. When a veteran comes in, he or she will stay back there and come not when the service is on. They come on Good Friday. Yeah, they learned that overseas that crowds were targets, and being in a crowd made you a target. Some veterans will even involve talking about the incident that affected them. They feel like they have lost the ability to trust others or themselves. They may use drugs or alcohols to numb their memory and feelings. Whether or not their personal sacrifice involved PTSD or moral injury, we owe our vets a world of honor and support. Reverend John Brink, who's a colleague of mine, is not only a pastor, but he's a Marine and a vet. And he points this out. So many have been called to serve, to offer their lives for others without any certainty of success or perfection. From the Revolutionary War to today, over 45 million have served. We are called to be healing and reconciling and binding up of wounds, ministering to the needs of the poor, the sick, the lonely, and the powerless. We are called to engage in the effort to free ourselves from sin, fear, oppression, and injustice. Sound familiar? Seems to me we are in step with the call of Jesus. Jesus lived and died and rose again that we might know the love of God and the call to servanthood and community. Veterans often return home craving that familiar sameness that is home. But the people that they left to fight are not the same either. The soldier coming home is not the same one that left a short time ago. Vietnam vets, especially, had to wait decades to receive the kind of welcome home they should have deserved from the beginning. We need to recognize the sacrifice of vets returning then and now and facilitate their physical and emotional well-being and healing, and to teach them how to surf the wave of change in their lives now that they're back. I particularly like one definition of a vet, and I'm going to close with that. A veteran is someone who has experienced and found wisdom, someone who has seen more than we can know, that has experience that we should respect and admire. Our troops deserve to come home to gratitude and welcome, and we can take this holiday to honor our living legends. And to this I can enthusiastically add, amen. In this day of remembering people who have given so much, and often without a lot of thanks from us, we remember. And as I send you forth this week, I ask you to remember not only their sacrifice, but our part of that we are part of the community that can keep them safe, the community that can give people a sense of belonging, and that someone cares that will snuff out the insidious desire for self-harm. I ask God to bless you all this week and to show you how you can heal people and make you think about that as you stand in line at the supermarket and as you watch people so furiously busy that they don't see one another. May God bless you and keep you all this week and make you conscious of God's presence now and forevermore. Amen.